All right, everyone, today is the second Sunday of Lent, and the Gospel today is taken from Mark chapter 9, verse 1 to 10, the Transfiguration of Jesus. The Gospel today begins with Jesus taking three disciples, Peter, James, and John, up a mountain with him for a very powerful and intimate encounter with God. Now, going up a mountain in the Bible is a code word for going to a place where there is going to be a very special encounter with God, whether it be with Abraham or Moses or Elijah. The mountain is a special place, a place of encounter where divinity and humanity meet, and also a place where great change happens in the hearts of those who encounter God in these places. Mark gives us three characteristics about this mountain experience, which I think are interesting and give us almost like a program for our Lenten journey. And it is that it was on a mountain, it was far away, and they were alone. Now, with lockdown, it's not easy to get far away, but it speaks to us saying that, it's time to cut off from the usual distractions and to go to a place where we can be alone with God and to speak to Him and to encounter Him truly, and where there can be real change in our lives. Our lives are a pattern of high and low moments constantly. And to be a Christian, to be a Catholic, is to be able to cope with the high moments and the low moments, as St. Paul says. And the high moments, it's relatively easy maybe to believe and trust God in these moments. But the high moments are always moments to prepare us as well, where God is telling us something very special to get us through the low moments. And that's what Jesus is doing today. He's teaching the disciples who He really is, so that when the low moments come, they can cling to Him and believe and trust in Him. In this part of the Gospel of Mark is called The Way. It's about 2 chapters long, and it's like sandwiched between 2 miracles of a blind man. And of course, this is the Gospel of Peter. So Peter's trying to say, I was blind. I refused to follow that journey down with Jesus. I wanted the high all the time, to go on a high into heaven. But no, Jesus says to Peter 3 times, I have to suffer. I have to go through a difficult time. And Peter refuses this. And today's Gospel is showing us that the disciples were in a kind of a low slump, and Jesus wanted to give them a light and an encouragement and a grace to get them through the difficulties ahead. In 1990, many moons ago, as they say, I did my very first pilgrimage. I was in Poland, and we walked for like 9 days, 10 days, sometimes like 20 kilometers a day. So it was quite intense. And the Polish were so courageous, and it was their first pilgrimage after the Iron Curtain came down. So there was a joy, but also like a determination there to do this pilgrimage. And you see sometimes mothers with prams and their children doing the pilgrimage. I was just on my own, I was exhausted. And I remember the joy, because there was a hill above Yasna Gora, where it's like the national pilgrimage site in Czestochowa. And you can see Czestochowa from the mountain. So you're walking for like 10 days, and all of a sudden you have the view of your destination. And the explosion of joy, I remember, was just incredible. I'll never forget that. And I think it's something similar here, is that Jesus shows them where we're going. The glory, that's what you will become one day. You will look like me. You will become like me. That's what the meaning of this life is. And we need that. Moments where we glimpse, this is where I live. That's where I'm going. This is my destination. And that's why this mountaintop experience today was so important for the disciples. Even if afterwards they struggled, this would have been imprinted in their lives. Shortly before he was gunned down in 1968, Martin Luther King also had a mountaintop experience. At least that's how he explained it and communicated it, which inspired millions of people to hope for a better future. And in that speech, he said, we've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've seen the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountain. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Often on a Sunday, the first reading sheds a beautiful and powerful light on the gospel, and vice versa, obviously. But today is very powerful. It struck me when I read chapter 22 in the book of Genesis, the sacrifice of Isaac, because it's such a painful and difficult passage when somebody has to give up their child. And yet it sheds a light on the gospel as well. Let me explain to you what I mean. We know the story well of Abraham and Sarah, who for many years were looking to have a child and couldn't have it. Such a painful experience for many couples who go through this. And finally, God answers their prayer, and there's so much joy. Even the child is called the laughing one, Isaac, that's his name. And then he's commanded to sacrifice his beloved son to God. How could God, who promised life precisely then, now demand that child back? It's such a difficult passage to understand. For me, this passage from Genesis 22, the sacrifice of Abraham, really sheds a light on one of the most painful human experiences that we can go through, which is when a parent loses a child. They receive this gift from God very graciously, and they're compelled to give back the child, a sacrifice that nobody would want to do, whether it be through illness or maybe even suicide or disease or accident. It's such a tragic event. And yet, for me, the Transfiguration is helping us to understand the process of dealing with pain. We say that what's not transformed is always transmitted. So it's really important to transform, to transfigure our pain. And the icon of the Transfiguration is, if we gaze upon it long enough, and millennia of Christians have gazed upon this icon, it is a healing icon because we see the end term. We will meet again. We will live in glory. We will be like him. There will be victory, and all tears, as the book of Revelation said, will be wiped from all eyes. As a community, as humanity, as a church, we have gone through a very difficult past year. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic asking myself the question, will I be a different person, a changed person at the end of this pandemic, however long it will last, because we still don't know when the end will come. Will my community be different? Will my parish be different? Will people change for the better or for the worse? Because you have a choice. It can lead to resentment and hurt and closing in on oneself. Or it can be a time of profound encounter and change and an opportunity to go deeper in our relationship with God. Every Lent, the very first Sunday of Lent, is about the temptations of Christ. And they always harken back to Moses in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy. They went through a similar kind of temptation in the desert. And Moses looks back in Deuteronomy and says, what can we learn from that? What mistake did we make? And he says, basically, we didn't trust. And I think today's gospel is telling us that as well, is that Jesus transfigured, looking us in the eye and saying, listen, the Father's voice is saying, listen to my son. You're my beloved son or daughter. Will you trust me?